project was launched in the last quarter of the 19th century in England with powerful help from a few American families who believed that the separation of the two countries had been the worst event in human history, and they wanted to work toward a long-term reintegration of Britain, the whole English-speaking world, as one country. That was their goal of the agenda. The values that had been forged by the British upper classes, the kind of society that they had tempered and designed, could become the clothing for the entire globe, and it would take time. I mean, one of the big things would be a common currency and a common language, but they knew that would be a long way off. So they began by setting up 23 bases all over the planet. Now, all those bases are still in business. The one in the United States is right up on 66th Street. It's called the Council on Foreign Relations, and they have different names in different places. But the idea was to draw into that club the best, the brightest, and the most influential people from the entire country, from all races and all walks of life, and to use those people as the resonator of the idea of globalization.
I've spent innumerable evenings at sessions such as this. I've hoped it would stay together when we all went back to different occupations, and I'm pleased to see that it still is an impressive and important institution in this country, as it's been since the early days of David Rockefeller and a number of his predecessors, which really in many respects formulated the foreign policy of this country.
Especially want to express my appreciation being here today with David Rockefeller. I've known David for many years, and as the founding member of the council, he's rendered yeoman duty to the nation. The family has a long history of strengthening the bonds of friendship throughout the Western Hemisphere, and of course my predecessor, Nelson Rockefeller, served as Assistant Secretary of State for Latin America in this department back in the 1940s.
A special televised meeting of the New York-based Council on Foreign Relations provides a window to the real story. The speaker, Vice President Dick Cheney, takes a question from David Rockefeller.
Vice President, I just enjoyed so much your whole speech, but I was particularly pleased that you gave such a strong endorsement for the free trade agreement for all the Americas, subject that has been of great concern to me for many years, and particularly recently.
I have been often to, I guess, the mothership in New York City, but it's good to have an outpost of the council right here down the street from the State Department. We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have this far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
"50 years after Ida Tarbell's scathing attack on John D. Rockefeller Sr. in McClure's magazine, Fortune magazine published a glowing profile of his grandchildren. Each brother was said to be worth upwards of $100 million. But more important than their wealth, Fortune argued, was the vast social empire which the brothers commanded. From their headquarters in Midtown Manhattan, their influence reached into every sphere.
Over the years, through the Rockefeller philanthropic enterprises, charities, support of science, their business enterprises, a web had developed which spread out and was interconnected with practically every center of power in our country and abroad as well. So this was the real strength and power of the family, going well beyond money alone.
Sometimes they would joke about it. They say, well, David gets Europe, Nelson is going to have Latin America, and John D. the Third gets Asia, and then they make some joke about what Winthrop got, which would be something like Arkansas. But nonetheless, there was something really behind the joke.
The Rockefeller family understood that and foresaw that New York was the inevitable home for the United Nations, the geographical center for the voice of humanity. In a brief video introduced by the United Nations Secretary General Boutros Ghali and containing some exceptional footage, the connection between the United Nations, New York City, and the Rockefeller Foundation is clearly drawn.
In doing this, it is appropriate to reflect and to draw strength from the early history of the United Nations. The Rockefeller family embodied the idealism of those years.
As the weary delegates of 54 nations prepare to end their meeting, the world takes stock of recent weeks, highlighted by the beginnings of cooperation. Hopeful signs are the unanimously passed resolution on armaments reduction and atomic controls. And there was big news in the last days as headlines told another story. The gift of a site by John D. Rockefeller Jr. for a permanent world capital in New York.
And if there is a conspiracy at work among these men, why hasn't someone on the inside exposed it? The answer is, someone has. Dr. Carroll Quigley is a professor of history at Georgetown University. He is the author of the widely used textbook, Evolution of Civilization. He is a member of the editorial board of the monthly periodical, Current History. He has been a frequent lecturer and consultant for such groups as the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, the Brookings Institution, the U.S. Naval Weapons Laboratory, the Naval College, the Smithsonian Institute, and the State Department. Dr. Quigley also has been closely associated with many of the family dynasties of the super-rich. He is, by his own boast, an insider with a front-row view of the world's money power structure. When Dr. Quigley wrote this 1,300-page book of dry history entitled Tragedy and Hope, it was obvious that it would never be read by the masses. It was intended for the intellectual elite. And to such a select readership, Dr. Quigley cautiously exposed one of the best-kept secrets of all time. But he also made it quite clear that he was an extremely friendly apologist for this group, and that he fully supports their goals and purposes. On page 950, Dr. Quigley says, "I know of the operations of this network because I had studied it for 20 years, and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it, or to most of its aims, and have for much of my life been close to it and to many of its instruments. In general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown." Dr. Quigley believes that people should be more familiar with the identities of these clever banking dynasties. They include such names as Baring, Hambros, Lazard, Erlanger, Warburg, Schroeder, Seligman, the Spires, Mirabeau, Mallet, Fuld, and above all, Rothschild and Morgan. It should be noted that while the Rothschilds and other Jewish families cooperated together in these ventures, this was by no means a Jewish monopoly, as some have alleged. Men of finance of many nationalities and many religious and non-religious backgrounds collaborated together to create this superstructure of hidden power.